So to complete this fitness testing, I had to create a risk assessment. So the department doing it under is obviously sports and exercise science. The activity itself was taking place in Brighton on the 31st of January 2021, assessed by me and signed by me. Regularly, I would get this signed by the client as well. However, I didn't have access to have a signature from him. So there are various hazards that we have to take into consideration. So one of our hazards is the overexhaustion of the client. So to prevent this, we must make sure that he has access to water, he will have eaten before he takes part in these tests, and we have rest between each of these tests. We don't go from one straight to the other. The likelihood of this actually happening is probably about 3 out of 10, and the risk rating is about 4 out of 10 if he does become overexhausted. It can be quite dangerous, but nothing that can't be fixed. If it does happen, however, we would need to terminate the test, hydrate the client, and restore glycogen levels for them, so we make them eat and have a snack, if we could, one that's high in sugar. So another hazard is injury prevention. People at risk is the client. So to stop this from happening, we would make sure they did a warm-up and a cool-down, wear thermal clothing, especially at this time of year, with it being January, February time, it's freezing, and they should be wearing shoes with traction if they're running, this is. The likelihood of this happening is much higher, it's about a 7 out of 10, and the risk is about a 5 out of 10. If this does happen, we would want to stop the testing immediately. We would need to keep the client warm if they've suddenly stopped moving, and we should have a first aid kit on us that we may need to use. Another one is knee pain, specifically to my client. That's not such a general hazard from his previous injury. So controls here are the rest period that we would have in between each test. He should take part really in regular stretching between each activity if he could stretch out his muscles, and we will stop an activity if it is needed. The likelihood of this happening is about an 8 out of 10. His knee probably is going to hurt a bit after he's come out of surgery, but it shouldn't hurt to the amount that it becomes a problem. If it does become a problem, the risk is quite high, 7 out of 10. It could potentially put him out of activity for a lot longer again, which we don't want. If his knee does begin to hurt, he will need to speak up. So we would get him to take a break from the activities, stop altogether if needed, and we would only return to these activities when his knee is no longer hurting and this isn't an issue for us. Another hazard that could take place is muscle cramp. This would happen to the client, obviously. Controls we would have in place here is we would make sure they had water on them and they were drinking it regularly. We'd make sure they'd done a suitable warm-up before we started, and stretching in this warm-up and stretching between activities, especially before sort of the sit and reach test. The likelihood of him getting cramp is probably about 4 out of 10, and the risk is about 2 out of 10. This is easily resolved with some stretching it out. So we would stop testing if this does happen, stretch the affected area, it's normally like the calves, and we would hydrate, make sure he drinks to flush out the lactic acid. Another hazard would be slips, trips and falls. This would happen to the client. It could potentially happen to the tester as well, but that would be sort of through walking and general slipping, not through the activity itself. The controls in place are that we should have a first aid kit on us. We would check the surfaces used. So if they were running on a running track, then we would obviously check that, or the floor surfaces that are used. And we would need to make sure we have space for resting. The likelihood of this actually happening is probably a 2 out of 10. Weather dependent, really. If it had been raining, he's far more likely to slip than if it was a warm, sunny day. The risk, however, is about 4 out of 10. If it was a nasty fall, it could end in a nasty injury. We would have to terminate the test, use the first aid kit if needed, and consult a doctor if it was really a really bad injury. A particular hazard for at the moment is COVID transmission. This can happen to the client, the tester involved, or the public. For example, the Cooper run that we did was in public, so it was run past general people. We don't want to catch COVID off them nor give them COVID. So we should use masks when not exercising. The tester should always have a mask on, and the client should be able to wear one between exercising. It's not really ideal to be exercising with one on. We'd use regular sanitisation and social distancing. If the client and the tester aren't from the same household, then they shouldn't be within sort of 2 meters of one another, and we would try and keep the client 2 meters away from the general public as well. The likelihood of COVID transmission is probably a 5 out of 10. The client and the tester should have taken a COVID test before taking part in these tests at all, but obviously the general public, you don't know whether they're infected or not. And the risk rating is an 8 out of 10. If COVID is caught, this obviously can not be very pleasant and can end quite seriously. However, we will be doing COVID tests, or we should be doing COVID tests before the testing and after. And if the client or the tester or whomever does have COVID, they should isolate for the necessary time if needed. Another hazard that could happen is injury from poor technique. This would happen to the client. So there should be proper instructions given. There will be demonstrations shown before taking part in this testing, and we will prevent this from happening. So if the tester sees the client performing poorly and not stretching or not completing the tests in the way that they should be done, we will stop the testing and re-show them. The likelihood of this actually happening is a 2 out of 10, considering they will have been shown how to do this properly. And the risk rating is 6 out of 10. If things are performed with poor technique, they can cause quite serious muscle injuries. So actions taken are the demonstration videos and immediate termination if it is seen to be wrong. And if the technique is so wrong that the client hurts themselves, there will be different actions taken, such as checking an injury or seeing a doctor. Reasons to defer or terminate testing completely are contraindications from the screening PARQ, if anything bad is flagged up in these, extreme fatigue, an excessive blood pressure. If it becomes over 220 over 115, this is very excessive and they must stop testing. If the client requests a stop, if they're in too much pain or if they're tired, they don't feel like they can go on any longer. Not the sort of tired where they're exerting themselves, but if they seriously don't feel like they can go on any longer, the testing will be stopped. If any of the equipment used fails, if the client experiences cramp or pain at all, if they experience shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, we would need to terminate the test, and if their heartbeat starts to become irregular. We would have an accident form on site, one that looks a bit like this. If the client does happen to injure themselves, to cover ourselves, we would use an accident form that is then kept for a specific amount of time after their injury. If the client is under 18, I think it's kept up to 5 years, because this can come back to hurt us as an organisation, or as a tester. So we would need to have this written on file in case the injury gets worse. So we would take things like the client's full name and address, their postcode, and then we would need to take into account what the accident was, how it happened, where it happened, the time that it happened, and all of these things, and how these injuries were treated. It is up to the tester and the client themselves whether or not this injury is taken sort of further, whether it is taken to hospital or to a doctor, or if they can just deal with it themselves. But when we were testing, no injuries happened, no harm did come to the client, so we didn't need an accident form. So looking at the client's documents, the PARQ and their informed consent, we had to ask the client certain things that we needed them to say yes or no to. So I asked, has your doctor ever said you have a heart condition that you should only do physical activity recommended by a doctor? No. Do you feel pain in your chest when you do physical activity? Again, no. In the past month, have you had chest pain when you were not doing physical activity? No. Do you lose balance because of dizziness, or do you ever lose consciousness? No. Do you have a bone or joint problem that could be made worse by a change in physical activity? No. Has your doctor currently prescribing medication for your blood pressure or heart condition? No. And do you know of any other reason why you should not take part in physical activity? No. If any of these were given as a yes, we would have to review it. Potentially these tests can go ahead. Potentially they would need to speak to a doctor before taking part. But we did receive all no's, which means we could go ahead as usual. Then we take informed consent from the client. So are you aware of the protocol for each fitness test that will be administered? Yes. Do you consent to taking part in the testing? Yes. Do you consent to any medical intervention by a practitioner before, during, or after the test? Yes. This is very important. If the practitioner feels, If the practitioner feels that the client is not performing as they should be, or if they need help at all, then they are allowed to intervene and they are allowed to overrule the client into whether or not they feel like they can carry on. Do you consent to being photographed and or filmed for evidence? Yes. So I do have pictures of our client completing these tests. Do you consent to your results being used as data that is compared to normative values and evaluated to help assist your consultation? Yes. So we could then take the data that we had recorded from these testings and use them to create a specific consultation that allows us to provide exercises to improve the client's fitness. So for each of the tests, I recorded myself demonstrating them. This is in a separate video, which is attached to this YouTube. It will be in the playlist. Basically, so I could give a demonstration of me doing things like the sit and reach test, the stand and vertical jump, and the sit-up test easily. So this was me at home because I couldn't go and see my client. Then I used this data collection sheet to record. So these are Harry's results here for each of the 6 tests. So we have the Cooper run, we have the Cooper run, the sit and reach test, the handball toss, the 30-meter sprint, the standing vertical jump, and the sit-up test. Harry's results are all recorded here. So obviously all of these are measured in different units of measurement as well. And these are the normative averages, and this is where Harry came in. Sorry, that should be poor. These are where Harry came in each of these tests. So as you can see, as a quick overview here, only one of them was above average where we would want it to be. 2 of them were on average of the normative data this is. 2 were below and 1 was poor. So we would look to start by improving the poor one, then look at improving the below average ones, the average ones, and then the above average ones, so on and so forth. So starting with the Cooper run, here we have proof of Harry running. This is also really helpful. Here we have his phone recorded how far he ran. You can see from this sort of drawing diagram here, he didn't sort of run in a square sort of 6 times. He ran a specific distance. The distance was recorded here. We can see he ran 2.29 kilometers. He did it for obviously 12 minutes. So his results if we're looking at the males aged 17 to 19, 2.29 kilometers fits in here and is less than 2,300 meters, obviously 2.3 meters. So he comes under the poor category. This flags to us that he needs immediate improvement on this. We don't like this score. As a footballer, he needs to be able to maintain play for 90 minutes. He needs to be able to run around a pitch for 90 minutes, not 12 minutes. As a person as well, everyday activities such as walking the dog, running for the bus, climbing stairs, these all require a high cardiovascular endurance score. Here we can see in the table, we can see Harry's results in the red, the average in blue, and then all the different averages flagged up here. So Harry does come into just under this. He's not far off of being in the below average, but we would look to improve this quite drastically and quite fast.